Today's topic on journey to Google Cloud is a managed Active Directory. So I'll give you my opinion. Actually, I will give you the facts and a detail about managed Active Directory, and also I will give you some information, the background information about the Active Directory. I am working with Active Directory for over 20 years. I started when we have Windows NT 4.0. So as far as the managed Active Directory is concerned by Google Cloud, I would say, it's just my opinion, I would say this is for small companies, and or if you have a new setup, you're starting your company, you can use this one. Or if you don't have a technical skill sets, then obviously, this is perfect because Google will manage your Active Directory. And also, if you are not using Office 365, for example, Exchange or Teams or SharePoint, all those services, then yeah, go ahead and use managed Active Directory. Because if you are using those services, like I mentioned, then most likely you have Microsoft, the on-prem Active Directory, and that on-prem Active Directory is syncing with Azure AD. And Azure AD provide all those things. So if you don't have, yeah, go start with the Google Managed Active Directory. And this is just my professional opinion because most of the details in this presentation is kind of biased towards Google Cloud because that's their product, and I am basically assisting people or educating folks if they are moving from on-prem to Google Cloud. So this is just the overall why AD on a Google Cloud and who wants to use it. This is just a beginning. So if we go to our next slide, is for those folks who don't know, what is Microsoft AD actually? So Microsoft Active Directory offers many benefits to organizations of all sizes. And this is not new. Like I said, this is coming since in 1996 for NT 4.0. It provides secure authentication, authorization, and access control for users to access different resources on a network as well as on cloud. It also simplifies the management of user accounts, group computer, printers, application, and other network. So basically, say the Active Directory is a directory service, right? Developed by Microsoft, of course. And Active Directory is an important part of IT infrastructure. It can be used to manage, like I mentioned, devices, domain, and the object. And also, the organizations use Active Directory for its seamless identity and access management capabilities. And then you can see on the bottom of this slide, you have a on-prem Active Directory. And it has a Azure AD connector to sync on-prem to Azure AD. So this is basically for those who don't know what the Microsoft AD is or Active Directory is. So this is just a brief introduction about it. And manage Microsoft AD overview. So this is the product which Google Cloud is selling it, or they are providing it to other companies or enterprise companies. So basically, it's a managed service for Microsoft Active Directory. So they named it Managed Microsoft AD. It's offer highly available hardened Microsoft Active Directory domains hosted by Google Cloud. And we will go in more details in upcoming slides. So this service helps reduce the important but mundane administrative tasks required to manage Active Directory while also extending your Active Directory footprint into the cloud. So they are helping you to extend or have your Microsoft Active Directory named as managed Microsoft AD into the Google Cloud. So manage Microsoft AD allow connecting to your existing on-prem Active Directory infrastructure from Google Cloud through a forest level trust, facilitating secure access to your organization's data. So when they are talking about forest level trust, if you are familiar with the Microsoft Active Directory, you are familiar with forest. So what basically is doing it is kind of creating a forest level trust. There are some more options basically, and then they will manage the via trust your on-prem Active Directory. So Google will not touch your on-prem Active Directory, but they will create a trust and they will help you set up the identity federation by deploying Active Directory on Google Cloud. And also deploying the Active Directory on Google Cloud allows you to maintain Windows VM on Google Cloud. It can enable user to log into Windows VMs using their existing user's account and support applications that rely on Kerberos, NTLM, or LDAP for authentication. However, to use Google Cloud Console and Cloud command line tools which Google provides, you have to authenticate with Google Identity. Deploying Active Directory on Google Cloud is therefore not a replacement for your federation, your existing Active Directory with Google Cloud. If you are a kind of intending to use Active Directory as your leading system for managing users, let me explain a little bit more. For example, if you deploy a separate forest on Google Cloud, see, that's why it says it will manage your on-prem Active Directory using forest level trust. So if you deploy a separate forest on Google Cloud, then you can set up a federation against your on-prem Active Directory. So the users with accounts in the on-prem Active Directory can then use tools that requires a Google identity as well as your application that rely on Active Directory for authentication. So I know this sounds kind of confusing at this point, but on upcoming slides you will have a much better idea about this one. So the next is like how managed Active Directory works. Like I said, if you're familiar with the Microsoft Active Directory, so this one is not different than Microsoft Active Directory basically. So this is the managed Microsoft AD is a little bit different, but it runs on actual Microsoft Active Directory domain controllers on Windows Virtual Machine to ensure application compatibility. So there is absolutely no problem in terms of compatibility because they are exactly the same. The only difference is how they manage. So the service creates and maintains the domain controller for you, reducing the maintenance tasks you need to manage. So if you look at it here in the bottom of this slide, so this is your on-prem data center. And then they create a managed service for a Microsoft AD using various methods. And this one we're saying the Forest Trust. And then you have your application running, which are AD dependent and apps and servers, so on and so forth. So far, hey, the Google Cloud or the managed active Microsoft AD is basically runs on actual Microsoft Active Directory domain controllers for compatibility purposes. So we will talk about it. What is the difference, right? So if we go further, so how managed Active Directory works basically. So if you look at this one, this is a not a specific diagram. This is a general diagram. You can see your data center on the top where you have a customer data center or user data center, and you have a multiple VPNs. And those VPNs comes into a cloud VPN. Then you have a cloud router, and then you have a Windows GCE. And if you are not familiar with Windows GCE, it's just a fancy name for Google Compute Engine. So Google Compute Engine, where you have all your servers running. And then you have a cloud DNS, which is peering to the cloud DNS on Google managed site. So basically, this is a Google managed site on your right side, right? So you have a Google VPC and you have a VPC peering. Peering basically gives you a connection on the back end between the Google infrastructure. So the VPC peering is very common between Azure or AWS or this Google Cloud. So you don't need to set up any VPNs between these two. So this is the Google managed side, and this is the customer project. Basically, customer don't see this thing, but this is what is in the back end. And so if we go a little bit on details, so the private Google managed project is neither visible nor accessible to the customer. So we just wanted to make sure, hey, this is not accessible or visible to customer. This is on the back end, right? But the domain controller instances are reachable over the VPC peering connection established between the customer's VPC and the Google managed VPC. So they cannot see this thing, like they cannot actually see how this thing is hosted, but they can access it. So they can access it using VPC peering and their own peering. Like, hey, they can log in to the domain controller, not like RDP. They can use the utilities to connect and manage it. If necessary, domain can be extended to 4 additional regions. So right now you see one region or one set, then it could go to 4 different regions, and each region will end up having 2 domain controllers for redundancy. And one thing is, when you add this to other regions, then of course it will cost you more money. And it's just not an option. You say, hey, I'm going to bring my own Windows license or server license. No, you cannot bring BYO Windows licensing for managed AD. If you need more information, you can always go to the Microsoft website and look for, hey, what is the licensing for Google Cloud? So if you are not already, not already present, I mean, if not already present, the cloud DNS is enabled and configured in a customer project with a domain peering zone on the AD domain, which points to the domain controller instances in the Google managed project. And so basically what they're saying is, hey, this Google DNS is configured with your customer project, and then it will do a domain peering to a cloud DNS, and then it will be pointing to your managed AD servers. Let me go back to the slide a little bit. I'm sorry. So the AD domain, which points to the domain controller instances in the Google managed project, this enables GCE instances on the other server to resolve and manage AD domain using cloud DNS. So basically what they're saying is the cloud DNS right here on this side, this can be pointed to the other domain controllers for domain resolution. This enables GCE. GCE is right here. This enables GCE instances or other servers to resolve managed AD domain using cloud DNS. Managed AD is accessible to GCE server in the project or other VPC as long as it has appropriate peering and routing are configured. So just to just to give you more background, if you have a servers running in Windows GCE and they need to resolve to these managed AD domain, then they can go through with the cloud DNS, and then it will be doing a domain peering, and then it will be resolving your DNS queries or domain name resolution. It's a bit complicated, but once you get into it, it's not really very complicated. So on-prem servers are also able to access managed AD via established VPN or interconnect connection with the similarly appropriate routing and DNS configuration. So basically, your on-prem via VPN can connect to DNS and to the managed part of your Active Directory. So initially, the managed AD, Active Directory VPC, VPC stands for Virtual Private Cloud, is paired with a single customer VPC. But it can be paired into 5 additional VPC to permit additional access to the service by host and other VPC. What they're saying is right now you see one VPC pairing, and this could be added for additional VPCs if you are going to connect different areas. So they were saying it's 4. Let me check if this is 4 additional or is total 5. So they are saying basically, I mean, initially single, but it paired to 5 additional VPCs. So basically, it would be, let me correct, I'm sorry. So initially 1 and then 5 additional, so it's going to end up to 6, if I'm not mistaken. Managed AD is generally compatible with identity providers such as Okta, but may require special configuration in order to work properly. So Okta, as you know, is a third-party provider. We provide identity among, there are many, but Okta is one of the biggest. For example, the Okta agent attempt to create its own service account during installation. So in order to make Okta authentication, then you have to install an agent. When you install an agent on your Active Directory, it creates its own service account. But in this particular case, if you are trying to make it work with the managed Active Directory, it will fail because it won't be able to create an account. So the workaround is basically you create manually create an account and give kind of limited permission, so the Okta installer can use the service account instead of creating a new one, which is done in the installation. I mean, if once it's done, the installation will succeed. Manage AD also supports the group policies, but only in a specific organizational unit. So in your AD, you will create a OU. For example, you can name that OU as a manage AD or Google AD, and you can manage the group policies just for that specific the OU. So I know this is a lot I talked about, and there are, if you need more specific information, feel free to drop me a line, and I will definitely clarify that part which you need explanation. So this is basically a managed AD limitation. There are a lot of limitation actually. This is not a straightforward, even though it runs on Active Directory, actual Active Directory domain controllers, but it's not the Microsoft, the Active Directory. So because the Google is managing it for you, and they kind of what to say that I mean, the limitation is, as a managed service, there are limitations to what a customer can do with managed AD. These limitations are there to ensure that the service remains a managed service and not a co-managed service. So co-managed service means Google not going to let you manage that. They're going to let you use it, access it, but they are going to manage. So managed AD, so what are the limitations among others? So managed AD cannot become part of an existing AD domain, whether on-prem or in GC. GCP means Google Cloud Provider. Domain controller for managed AD cannot be deployed on-prem or GC instances. So here I'm going to repeat this thing. Um, the domain controller for managed AD cannot be deployed on-prem or as GCE instances in customer project. They run only in Google managed project in the Google Cloud. So what we saw earlier, I'm going to go back here. So see these one right running here. Um, right here, the manage AD, they have to run separately. You cannot use the manage Microsoft AD domain controller. You say, hey, I'm going to run it on my side of the cloud or on-prem. No, you cannot. This has to be run here. And of course, you have to they have to be reachable via VPC peering connection between the customer VPC and Google Managed VPC, and also between the on-prem VPC. And I mean, if necessary, the domain can be explained or can be expanded basically to 4 additional regions. So this is what I was saying. So this is just one, and then you can add it to 1, 2, 3, 4, and like I said, so it's going to be total 5, and on 5 each site has 2 domain controller. So you're going to end up having 10 domain controller. So although additional charges will apply, there is not currently an option, like I mentioned earlier, there's no BYO Windows licensing. So let me go back to where I was here. So now let's talk about a little bit more about the limitation, because this is very important to know the limitation, right? So the limitations are, hey, AD cannot become part of an existing domain, and a user cannot access domain controller server via RDP or other means. It's not like you say, hey, I'm going to do RDP, or I'm going to run some VNC, or I'm going to run with some third-party software to get access to it or log into it. No, you cannot. You can only use it for authentication mechanism for domains resources. So the domain and underlying GCE instances cannot be backed up using third-party backup utilities, since they are not part of the customer project or organization. So this is another thing. The limitation is you cannot even back up Google manage AD domain controllers. It will be managed by GCP. And another limitation is the Active Directory DHCP cannot be used. You cannot use these managed domain controller for DHCP. However, Active Directory DNS is part of the deployment, and it is integrated with the cloud DNS. So the cloud DNS is integrated with your domain, managed domain controllers. And also we're talking about the domain admin group. You know, like everybody knows domain admin group. It's kind of administrators love this thing. It's not accessible on customers. So basically, you cannot access that one. What Google is providing is that the customer must use the cloud service administrator. So instead of domain administrator, they have a cloud service administrator global group in a global service object for you. So what's the benefit is this grant a customer level administrative permissions to user who would typically utilize a domain admin role. So you cannot use a domain admin, but there is a way around to do it. For example, if you are using Okta service account should be a member of Cloud Service Administrator group and will then be able to provision accounts in the Cloud OU. So when you're using Okta and if you're using Okta to create an account, the Okta service account must be part of the Cloud Service Administrator group. So these are some limitations. There are more limitations actually. These are just the major limitation. For example, the cloud service, all administrator domain local group is available for use and has the same level of permission as cloud service administrator. But due to its group type, basically can include users from other trusted domains. So, which is pretty normal. And other administrative level groups such as enterprise admin, right, built-in administrators and schema admins are not available to the customer. Why these are not available to the customer? Because they are managed but normally, why do you need a schema admin whenever you need to install or extend the schema, right? But in this case, Google is providing or managing it, so they can do it for you if you want to. But you as a customer cannot access enterprise admin, again, built-in administrator and or schema admin. These are the limitations. And also, only the cloud OUs and any sub OUs within our customer managed. Okay, I'm going to say it again. Only the cloud OUs and any sub OUs within it are customer managed. All customer users group and computer object must be placed in a cloud OU if you want to manage. So you cannot even manage users or groups outside the cloud OU. And there are more details. You can actually just go ahead and read the Google Manage Active Directory AD documentation on google.com. Any customer group policies can only be attached at the cloud OU level or sub OU level as appropriate. The default domain policy and other pre-existing policies cannot be modified. Like in normal on-prem AD, if you need to make some global change, the fastest way is to go and modify the default policy. But in this managed scenario, you cannot. Um, Also, when the managed AD account is deployed, an initial setup admin account is created. So you have a setup admin account, and that is member of cloud services administrator, kind of domain admin. Use this account to establish other administrative account. Once other accounts are present, then this account should no longer be used, just like domain admin account. Hey, you can create other accounts, but normally don't use domain admin account unless it's absolutely necessary. Its password can be reset as needed via Google Cloud Console. So if you forget your for the setup admin password, and you can use your Google Cloud Console to reset that password. And the other limitations are some domain level permissions are currently restricted. For example, setting set history on an object, you can do it. This may impact third-party management or migration utilities when interacting with or migrating to a managed AD domain. However, the domain level administrator task of establishing trust can be performed by the customer, but only through the Google Cloud Console instead of the Active Directory domain and trust snap-in. So normally, if you're familiar with Active Directory, when you need to set up a trust between two domains, one-way trust or two-way trust between forests, you go to the built-in utilities, which Microsoft provide. But in this particular case, if you want to set up a external trust or you want to set up a forest level trust, you have to go to the Google console. I know there's a lot of limitation. You can pause this video and then you can listen again, or feel free to go to Google, cloud.google.com. They have tons of information available. So now we are actually continuing more limitation. As a managed service, there are limitations to what a customer can do with the managed AD. These limitations ensure service remain a managed service and not a co-managed service. So this is just kind of, I'm repeating it. The reason I'm repeating it, so you should know what the limitations are. So we already talked about it, but now we are going to display on a slide what I was just talking about it. So you will have a better idea. So for example, the managed AD cannot become part of an existing domain. This is just we talked about. Whether on-prem or in GCP domain controller for managed AD cannot be deployed on on-prem or GCP instances in customer project. They run only in Google Managed Project in Google Cloud. See, so this is make it like black and white what you can do or what you cannot do right here. User cannot access domain controller. We talked about it via RDP, and the domain and underlying GC instances cannot be backed up using third-party backup utilities since they are not part of the customer project or organization. Active Directory DHCP cannot be used. Active Directory DNS is part of the deployment and is integrated with the cloud DNS. Because, the reason they're saying you cannot do it, because you can't do it, because the DNS is a integral part. It is very important. And, without DNS, there's no Active Directory, basically, or it won't work. That's why they are giving permission. Hey, say, hey, this is part of the deployment and it's going to be part of the cloud DNS, and you can use cloud DNS. So domain admin group, we talked about it, is not accessible by the customers, and customer must use cloud service administrator global group in the cloud service object OU. So basically, hey, there's no domain admin, you use a cloud service administrator, right? And again, it's going to continue for the Okta. We talked about it. Like you need a service account. If you need to install the Okta agent, you can create an account, pre-create account, and with the minimum information, and then Okta will use that pre-created account. And again, this is here. We just talked about it. Like enterprise admin, built-in administrator, schema admins are not available to the customer. Only cloud OU and sub OU within the customer manage. All customer group and object must be placed in the cloud OU. So basically, anything outside the cloud OU, you cannot manage it. And there are some other things you can actually just Google it. Microsoft manage Microsoft AD. Sorry. And then we're talking about, hey, the initial setup admin. We talked about it. This is the admin. You can not do anything with it. You can just change the password if you need to. And then you have some domain level permissions are currently restricted, such as SID. We talked about it. So when you are restricting SID, then there is a problem if you're doing a migration, something from one, let's say you acquired a company and you wanted to migrate and you want to keep the SIDs, or you want to manipulate the SIDs ID, you can't do it in a managed AD. So these are one of those limitations. Maybe this limitation will go away in the future, but right now it exists. There are some other domain level administrative tasks for establishing trust can be performed by the customer, but only through the Google Cloud Console instead of the Active Directory domain and trust. So this one we also talked about it earlier. In regular Active Directory, you go to domain and trust snap-in, and then you can set up the trust, break trust, whatever you want to do. But in this case, you have to go to you have to go to the Google Cloud Console. You cannot use that, the regular one. So these were a limitation. Now we're talking about, hey, management, right? So in terms of management, so once the domain is deployed, right? So are you familiar with this slide? We talked about on this slide, but we're gonna have a different context in terms of management. So once the domain is deployed, it can be managed like any other AD domain using established Microsoft utilities. So again, Microsoft utilities not logging in directly using RDP to log into those domain controllers. And so prior to being able to manage the domain, a Windows GC instance should be deployed and then joined to the domain by providing the domain's fully qualified domain name. Basically, they're saying if you want to manage the manage domain controller right here, you have to install here a Windows machine, join it to the domain, and then you can manage it. How you can manage it? Um, Once you log in with the username and password to this one, then you will install those tools. Tools meaning the roles and features, for example, server manager, using server manager, the group policy management, GPO, the remote server admin tools, ADDS and ADLDS tools, DNS server tools, DHCP tools are not necessary because they are not, you cannot use this managed domain controllers for DHCP. To manage AD object, use Active Directory user and computer, which is also like dsa.msc. A lot of people type in. Get to it. As usual, keeping any changes within the Google, within the Cloud OU. Use group policy management to manage group policies as you would normally um, do it in your regular Active Directory, but these modifications are limited to the Cloud OU, which you will create in your on-prem Active Directory. On-prem access to manage AD, as I was talking about it, due to the nature of implementation of manage AD through a VPC peer, the other networks able to access manage AD as long as appropriate peering and routing is configured. So basically, they're saying you have only one here, you can have more, and then you can connect to the more areas, and then those devices can communicate. So So manage AD through you kind of manage AD implementation of manage AD through VPC peer. Other networks are able to access manage AD as long as appropriate peering and routing is configured, including on-prem network and servers. So they can all communicate, of course, as long as there are path or network path to it. And to help on-prem devices know how to reach the managed AD subnet, these cloud routes associated with the VPN or an interconnect attached to the same project as Microsoft AD must advertise static routes to the managed AD. Basically, they're saying, hey, the router you see right here, it should advertise routes right here. So this way they can communicate. I mean, if you need to learn more about the networking, because that's just the general information, give you the concept how it will communicate. But when you actually wanted to deploy it, then you will definitely need to learn more information. Setting custom IPs, for example, arrange, configure cloud DNS for DNS resolution, and the project that has the managed AD domain. So basically, right here, you will have an AD managed domain, which are domain controllers here, but you can manage it from here. Um, you can configure the cloud DNS with a DNS policy permitting inbound query forwarding and associating with the necessary VPC. This will resolve, this will kind of reserve IPs in all subnet on the VPC for cloud DNS. The IPs will be capable of responding to DNS queries by on-prem servers. So again, this is a lot of details here, and you might have to review this thing a couple of times, or when you do a hands-on, then it's you actually have to do it at least once hands-on. And our next is multi-regional support, basically. So what we're talking about is regions and the availability zone, geolocation. So managed Microsoft AD supports multi-regional deployment of Active Directory Forest when paired with Google Cloud Global low latency virtual private cloud. So this low-level latency latency virtual private cloud is same between all other cloud providers because this is the backend. It's a dark fiber, a very high speed, high uh, availability, and high bandwidth. So within the VPC, you can extend manage Microsoft AD to multiple regions without requiring VPC peering or hybrid connectivity between the regions. Because it's a like I said, it's a dark fiber on the back end connecting all those regions. And this is good if you have users all over the world or all over the country where wherever between different, let's say you have in Canada or you have in the US, then you can have a domain controllers available in Canadian side versus US side. Um, Sorry. So the flexibility means that you can neither need to deploy manage Microsoft AD in the same region as the infrastructure, nor create a separate domain for each region. You can extend the domain to up to 4 supported regions and easily horizontally scale by adding or removing regions as needed, maintain high availability, and improve fault tolerance. Manage Microsoft AD deployed 2 domain controller to each region in a non-overlapping Google Cloud zones. So this is basically they're saying, hey, you can have user in a region, but you don't have to have a domain controller in that region because there's a low latency network. So you can have a domain controller in region A and users are in B. You can deploy domain controller in B, but you don't have to because of the um, uh, built-in connectivity supported by Google Cloud. So this is like now we know what the limitation is, how we can do it, how to do it. So this is like now this part comes like, okay, you have on-prem Active Directory. Now what do you want to do? How are you going to extend in a Google Cloud as a managed AD? So what is done here support the following Active Directory forest design models. Remember in the first or second slide, we say, hey, they extend, manage AD get extend as a forest, forest trust. So organizational forest, this same forest contain both users, an account, and resources which are managed independently. Basically, they're saying, hey, the organizational forest is where you have users and account both. The other one is a resource forest. It's a separate forest is used to manage resources, meaning you can have a users in one forest, and then you can have a resources servers in another forest. I think I'm going to show you a diagram in upcoming slide. And then you can have a restricted access forest, meaning a separate forest contains users account and data that must be isolated from the rest of the organization. So let's say you have some very highly classified data or accounts, and you can create a forest, and then that would be isolated completely from the rest of the organization. So this is what we talked about. The standalone forest is fully managed in cloud, create, migrate AD object right here. And then we're talking about the resource or forest, meaning managed AD houses cloud VM computers and service account. On-prem Active Directory continue to host users account and connect a one-way or two-way AD trust with one or multiple on-prem and AD forests. So you can have a resource, like I say, you can have a resources in one, and you can have a users in others, right? And then you have a mixed account and resource AD forests, where user with the cloud only needs can be fully managed in the cloud, right? So you have some application, you have some users, they don't need to come to the on-prem, so you can just leave them on the cloud, for example. Hey, as an external user, come here, hey, you get your services, whatever you want. And the second option is a cloud infra needs not bleed back into more closely watched on-prem AD. So what they're saying is if you fully manage in the cloud, then they don't have to come back to the on-prem AD. for anything. Typically part of the broader cloud migration strategy. So this is not something you just say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. So this is basically your planning comes into play. Like, what would be your design, depending upon your requirement or the future growth. Maybe you want to go to the cloud now, and then you decided, hey, we don't need the on-prem Active Directory. Again, I say that's the highly unlikely case, because if you are Microsoft and you're using Microsoft services, then you already have a presence in Azure AD. So you will never, get rid of your on-prem Active Directory. So there are a lot of different scenario, and there's a lot of different configurations. Hey, what if you don't have a on-prem AD, you have a Azure AD only then, and now you want to migrate to Google Cloud? What are the limitations? So these are the scenario, or you want to go to the AWS, or you have an AWS Active Directory, and you have an Azure AD. Now you want to go to the Google Cloud. What would be the scenario? So that things become more complicated, but it's not. It's complicated because I think I mentioned in my other videos. It's not that difficult. It just because people don't do this thing quite often. That's why it looks difficult. But if you hire a consultant who does this thing, Google Cloud Solution Architect, they do it every day. So for them, it's just a piece of cake. For them, it's going to be like, hey, what is your requirement? What's your expectation is, and they will lay out the plan for you. Of course, they're going to charge a lot. So that's the trade-off. So this was a forest design models, basically. We talked about it, how you're going to extend it. This is like, hey, for example, this is from the Google. So you have example.com. You say, let's say my abc.com. So here you get a cloudexample.com or cloudabc.com. So, and you create a one-way trust. So this is your on-prem AD. This is your cloud platform. You're extending it using one-way trust. You are trusting these things are trusting the users here, for example. So any user from here can log in and access the resource. Let's say you have a web server here, and then user from here, this web server is trusting these users, and he can access the resources. And the beauty is here, in this case, you manage only this thing. Google Cloud managed domain controllers are managed by Google Cloud. So you cannot even, like we talked about it, you cannot do a RDP, you cannot do anything except you will use some tools and authentication to access it. You cannot even back this thing up. You cannot even patch it because Google will patch it. If something goes wrong, they will recover it for you. They have a SLA, service level agreement. They will do a snapshot for this, and for a certain period of time, or certain days, or an hour, they will take a snapshot and they can restore it. So, but you cannot do anything, right? So to deploy Active Directory on Google Cloud, you first have to decide which domain and forest architecture to use, right? And if you already have Active Directory, like in this example, you also have to decide whether and how to integrate the two environment, right? Which design fits your situation best. Like I mentioned, you depending on a number of factors, including the design of your on-prem network, how on-prem and Google Cloud resources are going to interact, as well as your requirement for availability and administrative autonomy, right? You have some folks in your organization, they are domain admin, and when you extend their the same method or same tasks you do it on your on-prem, they cannot be done on your managed domain controller. How are you going to maintain the trust? How are you going to create a boundary? And how are you going to do a resource forest pattern? Let's say you have a Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager on-prem, and that's managing devices. Now you have moving some devices to the cloud, how that's going to interact, for example, right? Yeah, of course you can manage it, but you have to be sure what's your future state going to be. So this is another example. Like that was just a straightforward, right? You just do a you extend it, and this one is like, okay, this is your production forest, right? Now this is a you have a federation, like if you're using ADFS or um, different cloud identity. I don't want to go that deep because if we go into identity, that will take a kind of rabbit hole. So right here, for example, you created a prod.gcp example.com. So the thing is, basically, you see there are double two. So basically, this is your example.com on-prem. This is your gcp.example.com is your manage AD. And then you said after that, you got a dev and prod. So you're going to break it down one for the dev and test resource forest, and the other one going to be the production one. So this is just kind of organizing it and managing it. Of course, whenever you add a suffix to here, then of course per region you're going to be adding two domain controllers. So if you had just one and two, it's going to be two domain controllers. You got these two prod and dev, then you're going to be four domain controllers. And if you multiply into a different region, this could be, 5 regions, for example. So it's 20 domain controllers if we're talking about. And if I'm not mistaken, normally they charge like 40, 50 cents to an hour, not hour, 50 cents to $1 per hour. So see how quickly it's going to add up. So how much cost is going to be. So, and also you cannot bring your licenses here. You have to buy license from them. So you have to plan accordingly, like how much it's going to cost too. So the separate testing and a production domain. The reason is you wanna perform like infrequent changes in the Active Directory. So if you have a testing application, so that's the reason. This is the standard QA dev and production kind of scenario. So this is another one, forest design one. See, so we talked about it. I think we talked about the this one earlier. Have a prod and dev, and this is another one right here. You have a AD domain, you have a cloud.example.com, and you have a domain trust, two-way trust, and then you go to the example.com cloud identity account, for example, or federation. So this is a GCP organization, example.com. So you see, this is example.com, this is example.com, but this is the on-prem, and this is a GCP organization. So it's giving you more option for domain trust and how the federation going to work. So basically saying when deploying the Active Directory in Google Cloud allow you to manage Windows VM on Google Cloud, can enable users to log into Windows VM using their existing user's account and support applications who rely on Kerberos, NTLM, or LDAP authentication. So what they're talking about is, yeah, you can use all these tools, but of course you're going to be having a special tools, and then you're going to be setting up a server in a GCP customer area and install those tools. And this is like how managed Microsoft AD is different. We already know what's how different it is. We already talked about the limitation and who's managing what on-prem versus on cloud. So this particular one is just kind of um, uh, kind of providing more information like, hey, manage Microsoft AD differ from a traditional deployment of Active Directory in a number of ways, right? If somebody asks me to set up a domain from the ground up, I can build the entire Active Directory within 30 minutes or entire the other services associated within a day, for example, right? But when we are implementing a traditional deployment of Active Directory, for example, you say, hey, manually design and deploy your organization high availability AD topology. Like I said, if somebody asks me to build a domain controller, I can build that domain controller in 30 minutes or maybe less. But in order to make it highly available, then I have to build another domain controller. Then I have to plan, hey, this is on the production side or primary data center. And then I have to create one on a DR side. So just to do a highly available. Run AD diagnostic manually to ensure your domain is healthy. So this is what they're saying. Hey, for on-prem, you have to do all these things yourself. You have to make sure the CPU load, authentication, DNS replication, the on-prem, you as a owner, you do it. So remember, we're talking about a traditional deployment of Active Directory, right? Here we do a manually backup. Basically, this thing is a Google is saying, hey, look, you do all these tasks. If you go to manage AD, we will do it for you. So that's why they're just writing down step by step just to tell you, hey, what's the tasks are, the management task on-prem. So manually create a backup and verify the disaster recovery response, manually define firewall rules for the network that hosts your AD domains. Take special care to ensure other server running on the same network cannot compromise your AD domains. So let's say you have an AD domain running on 10.1.1.1, for example, and then you have other servers. So they're saying the other servers, people can log in, can access it, and then compromise your AD domain. Manually patch your AD domain controller using a Windows, patching. This is, of course, is part of the on-prem requirement. Make effort to design and implement security best practices, such as time-bound access to the domain administrator account. So this is just the fancy words they are putting in here, just to tell you, hey, managing on-prem Active Directory takes a lot of toll. It's a headache. So and also they want to make sure, hey, who access your Active Directory is their trusted user, have the administrative access to the resource to run your domain controller. So what they're saying is the whole slide is like, hey, the on-prem Active Directory management is headache on day-to-day basis, basically. And the whole point is, hey, we can do it for you, and you don't have to do it if you move to manage AD. So manage AD and network and hybrid. So this is just hey, nothing works without network, right? So you can have a hybrid or network. So basically they're talking about on-prem environment, on-prem environment, on-prem environment, right? First, second, third. And the first one, you have a domain controller, you have a cloud DNS, then you have a DNS forwarder. The client can go to the DNS forwarder, and the DNS forwarder will point to the cloud DNS, right? So this is like a one path they're talking about, like how the user or the DNS resolution will work. The other one is you have a domain controller, the client goes to domain controller, and here it was the client going to the DNS forwarder, but here the domain controller is going to go to the forwarder, and the rest is same, right? So the difference is between the client going to the DNS forwarder versus domain controller going to the DNS forwarders. And then, of course, you have a client goes to the cloud DNS, and the cloud DNS goes to the domain controller. So these are different scenarios right here. And depending upon your applications, might require Active Directory access, can potentially be deployed into a separate project. Using separate project help isolate resources and allow you to manage access. So basically they're talking about, like, kind of how to isolate it, how to protect it within the different models, how application going to access it. For example, you can have a shared VPC network allow you to centralize IP address management and firewall configuration, which help ensuring consistency across multiple projects. A VPC are a global resource. You can use the same shared VPC network across multiple regions. So they are saying, since these are the virtual, So if you create a network with a specific requirement or specific conditions or restriction, if you can reuse that in a multiple places, so you don't have to go and scratch it. So the shared VPC virtual private, um, you can use it. You can actually use it as a global resource. Basically, that's what they're saying. Do not expose domain controller externally. This is another thing. Hey, how to reduce a surface attack. Active Directory, avoid assigning external IPs addresses to the domain controller. So, like in Active Directory on-prem, your domain controller can have access to it, and if allowed, then the external access are granted to the domain controller. But in a managed Microsoft AD, that's not possible because Google manage it. Google protect it. You can enable a private Google access. You can have a for licensing. You can have a KMS licenses on a Google Cloud. You can have a if you have an on-prem WSUS server, you can configure hybrid connectivity and configure your domain controller to use a WSUS as a resource for update. You can enable internet access via NAT. So this is another option. Like, hey, you can use the hybrid connectivity where your domain controller can go to your WSUS server or MECM or SCCM and get those patches depending upon how you are using. You can do a reserved static IP addresses for domain controller in advance. This is not that important. You can deploy domain controller across multiple zones. We already talked about it. And there are a lot more information how to use cloud DNS private forwarding zones. Um, and you can use internal, you can do private DNS forwarding zones, so you don't need to adjust the networking configuration of VM instances. This simplifies the process of creating new VM. When you promote or demote a domain controller, you only need to update the configuration of the private DNS forwarding zone, and you do not need to modify. This is also true for the on-prem. So they are just like I said in my original first couple of slides. Hey, the whole presentation, whole video is kind of biased towards people pushing them towards the managed Microsoft Active Directory. Even though Microsoft Active Directory works fine and great, but what Google is trying to say, hey, you can offload, you can transfer a lot of responsibilities from your on-prem Active Directory to Google managed AD basically. So we will manage it, we will provide all the authentication, we will provide the availability, we will provide your DNS resolution, we will provide your user management. You don't have to worry about it. So like I said in the beginning, if you are a small company, yeah, this is the perfect solution. AWS will provide a perfect solution. But if you have a presence on cloud, for example, if you are using your Exchange or Office 365 or Office 365 related services, then it would be a little challenging for your on-prem Active Directory which is already syncing to the Azure AD. Then you are going to extend that on-prem Active Directory to the Google Cloud using Forest Trust with a different scenario, and then let the Google manage that, and then those applications are running on the Google Cloud, which are utilizing your Microsoft AD. Then how the authentication going to work? So it's not that difficult. Again, I'm going to say it again, it's not difficult, but people don't do this thing every day. And also, it comes to hardening your AD instances, right? For example, security is these days are big. They wanted to lock down everything, and so what? In order to protect the organization, right? So, for example, they say, hey, no public internet access, isolated tenants, private IPs for Active Directory domain controllers. and they are using a shielded VMs, which are very secure. Like somebody can take the VM, the file, but they still cannot do anything. So nobody can steal it, your domain controller or the data. So shielded VMs are standard for all managed Microsoft AD domain controller. Right? OS patches tested before applying them. AD remains unavailable. So these are the positive things about the managed AD from Google. Credential rotations using industry standard techniques, service credentials for managed AD servers shared between instances. So restricted production access for Google Cloud engineers. All on-call access requires validated justification, logged and audited. So that's what they're saying. Hey, look, we have a process in place for your domain controller, hosted under managed Active Directory in our environment, which is Google. And these are some of the things they are saying. Hey, you better come on board because we are providing a great service. Getting started with managed Microsoft AD. So we know all these things now what to do, right? So to get started with using managed Microsoft AD, specify the name of the managed Microsoft AD domain and the Google Cloud VPC network where the management Microsoft AD domain is authorized to be available. You can access the managed Microsoft AD domain using virtual machines, in your authorized Google Cloud VPC network or via on-prem infrastructure and other cloud products that connect to Google Cloud via VPN or Cloud Interconnect. So this is how you start. You do a managed Microsoft AD provides the following AD objects, right? So a delegated administrator account, use the account to manage your Active Directory domain. So they will give you a delegated administrator account. As you know, that a domain admin accounts are no longer exist in managed Microsoft AD. The Cloud Organizational Unit, OU, use the Cloud OU to create your Active Directory object, such as users, service account, and groups, as well as additional OUs. You can apply group policies object to the OUs you create under the Cloud OU. And anything outside the Cloud OU is not applicable in this scenario. And I think we are almost done. So this is just a brief slide, just just a summary basically. Hey, managed services of the Microsoft Active Directory is an Active Directory hosted on the Google Cloud Platform. Yes, we know that. Compatibility with the AD dependent apps because it runs on Microsoft AD domain controller. So there is no compatibility issues. Use the standard Active Directory features, that is group policy, remote server administrative tools to manage your Active Directory, of course, because you cannot do RDP or you cannot connect directly. Virtually maintenance free. So we say, hey, it is highly available, automatically patched, configured with secure default, protected by appropriate network firewall. So they are managing it. You don't have to worry about it. So it's maintenance free. Don't worry about it. Don't even need a backup. Don't even need a patch, right? Seamless multi-region deployment. So simply expand the service to additional regions while continuing to use the same managed AD domain. So you can go up to 5 additional domains, regions, and you extend it. Hybrid identity support, connect user on-prem AD domain to Google Cloud, deploy a standard domain for your cloud-based workloads. So there are, you know, um, lot of options in terms of, I mean, not a lot of options. Basically, the managed Active Directory is a pretty good the options for organizations moving to the Google Cloud. So of course, this is specific to Google Cloud, but this is just one of many options, right? So I think I am done with this thing. Thank you very much for your time reviewing it. And please let me know if you need more information on any topic. And I want to say thank you, and please subscribe to the channel if you like the presentation. Thank you, and